The most dangerous monopoly, when owners control whether capital can move. Most discussions of monopoly begin with counting firms. One firm is a monopoly, a few firms form an oligopoly, many firms imply competition. But this way of thinking mistakes a surface feature for the underlying mechanism. The real issue is not how many participants exist, but whether capital is subject to sufficient competitive pressure to move into the hands of those who can use it most productively. Once the problem is framed in terms of capital allocation rather than firm count, monopoly, oligopoly, cartelization, and entry barriers all collapse into a single general condition, a competition deficit. This occurs whenever the process that reallocates capital toward higher productivity users is too weak. Within that broader category, one form stands out as uniquely consequential: the control that the current owner exercises over whether capital can be transferred at all. This is not a monopoly over a product or a price. It is a monopoly over the decision to allow reallocation. From market structure to capital allocation. Standard economic analysis treats monopoly as a distortion within an otherwise functioning market. Prices rise, output falls, and surplus is redistributed. Implicit in this analysis is the assumption that transactions still occur. The market is operating, even if imperfectly. But the deeper failure occurs when the issue is not distorted exchange, but foregone exchange. The system may contain clear signals that capital could be used more productively elsewhere, yet the transfer does not occur. In that case, the problem is no longer about pricing within a market. It is about whether the market is functioning as a mechanism of allocation at all. This shift in perspective reveals that the central economic question is not how prices are set, but whether control of capital is continuously contestable. The general problem: too little competition over control. Every market is ultimately a process for determining who controls resources. In a well-functioning system, agents who can generate greater value from a resource are able to signal that advantage and acquire control of it. Over time, capital flows toward its most productive uses. When this process weakens, capital becomes stuck. It remains under the control of agents who are not the most effective users, not because better uses do not exist, but because those uses cannot displace the incumbent. The system loses its ability to select for higher productivity. This is the essence of a competition deficit. It can arise through many mechanisms: legal barriers, coordination among incumbents, informational frictions, or structural lock-in, but these are all secondary. The core failure is always the same: capital is not being reallocated in response to superior alternatives. The hidden monopoly: control over title transfer. At the center of this failure is a deeply embedded assumption that the current owner has the unilateral authority to decide whether their asset can be transferred. This authority includes the ability to refuse offers indefinitely, to ignore challengers who could deploy the asset more productively, and to hold capital in uses that are clearly inferior without facing displacement. This arrangement is typically treated as a defining feature of ownership. Economically, however, it represents a very specific form of monopoly. It is a monopoly over whether comparative advantage can be translated into control of capital. In a functioning system, differences in comparative advantage do not remain abstract. They are expressed through competitive pressure. Those who can use a resource more effectively reveal that advantage through offers and commitments, and control shifts accordingly. The process does not merely identify better uses, it implements them. When the current owner retains absolute authority over transfer, this mechanism breaks down. Superior uses can be recognized and even strongly signaled, yet they cannot compel reallocation. The system continues to rely on voluntary exchange, but the structure of decision rights ensures that exchange only occurs when the incumbent chooses to permit. In this sense, voluntary exchange is not blocked. It is made the only permissible channel for reallocation, while simultaneously being placed under the exclusive control of the very party whose position may be inefficient. The result is that comparative advantage becomes informational rather than operational. The system can identify better uses of capital, but it cannot reliably move capital toward them. Why this monopoly is economically devastating? The first consequence is that comparative advantage cannot be systematically realized. A higher productivity user may be willing and able to deploy an asset more effectively, but if the incumbent refuses to transfer it, that advantage remains unused. The economy recognizes the superior allocation but fails to implement it. The second consequence is a continuous and compounding opportunity cost. Each period in which capital remains in suboptimal use represents lost output, lost innovation, and lost coordination with other productive inputs. This loss does not appear as a discrete event. It accumulates quietly over time, reducing the overall performance of the system. The third consequence is the elimination of competitive selection. Markets function as adaptive processes that reward better uses of capital and displace worse ones. When transfer is controlled by the incumbent, this selection pressure disappears. Inferior uses can persist indefinitely because there is no mechanism forcing reallocation. The fourth consequence is that the system becomes structurally rigid. Capital is locked into existing patterns of use. Resources that could be combined in more productive ways remain separated. Innovation slows because access to key inputs depends not on productive capability, but on the discretionary choices of current owners. The final consequence is that tensions emerge between what the system reveals and what it can execute. When it is widely understood that capital could be used more productively elsewhere, yet no transfer occurs, the gap between potential and reality grows. The system contains the information necessary to improve, but lacks the mechanism to act on it. Why this is more fundamental than traditional monopoly. Traditional monopolies distort outcomes within a functioning market. They affect prices, quantities, and distribution, but they do not eliminate the process of exchange itself. The monopoly over title transfer operates at a deeper level. It determines whether exchange occurs in the first place. It governs whether the system can respond to differences in productivity at all. For this reason, it is more fundamental. It does not merely alter the results of the market process. It constrains the process itself. The real economic problem. The central economic problem is not the number of firms or the distribution of market share. It is whether capital is continuously exposed to sufficient competitive pressure to be reallocated to its most productive use. Whenever that pressure is too weak, a competition deficit emerges. And the most extreme form of that deficit occurs when the current owner has unilateral control over whether comparative advantage can be translated into control of capital. Conclusion. Monopoly, oligopoly, and related forms of concentration are not distinct problems. They are manifestations of a deeper failure, insufficient competition over who controls capital. At the center of this failure lies the unchecked authority of the current owner to decide whether capital can move. This authority transforms ownership into a gatekeeping position over the realization of comparative advantage itself. Voluntary exchange remains the formal mechanism of transfer, but it is constrained by the very structure of control. The system can identify better uses of capital, but it cannot ensure that those uses take hold. When capital is no longer contestable, the economy does not simply become inefficient. It loses its capacity to adapt, to improve, and to align resources with their most productive uses. The most dangerous monopoly is therefore not over prices or output, but over the movement of capital itself.